Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is the 10th and final installment of the Entomology episode. I kind of wish that I could have shoehorned lice and different kinds of lice, wood lice, head lice, book lice, and phasmids, which are really interesting stick insects, but just couldn't shoehorn them into the others. This episode, I'm actually going to be focusing on the non-insect hexapods. In other words, if it has 6 legs, but it's not an insect, it's in this group. And I'm going to start with, because I think I actually said a few inaccurate things in either the last or the before last episode. I think I said springtails. I may have said they were even insects, and then I think I said that they had cerci, which is not true. It's actually called a furcula. So it's not the same thing as cerci. So I think I'll cover them first. So they're called columbula, which means glue peg. They are not insects, even though they have 6 legs. It's sort of been controversial for a while, but DNA testing has really exonerated the theory that they're not insects. They're so genetically distinct from insects that the separation must have been something that took place a long time ago. So yeah, and they have internal mouth parts, which is interesting in and of itself. It makes them look kind of eerie. It's because, as humans, we kind of look for patterns, and to see something with eyes and doesn't quite look like they have a mouth, like when you're first looking at them, it's a little, I don't know, disturbing, and yet simultaneously they're also very cute. They're one of those animals that if you see macro photos of, it's kind of hard even for someone who doesn't like invertebrates to not think they're kind of cute. But, yeah. But the name columbula means glue peg, and that's because of a misnomer that they're, what's that appendage called, actually? Coliphore. Their coliphore was, for a long time, believed to secrete a glue-like substance. It's by the way, it's sort of a ventral tube that they have. It was believed to be to secrete a sticky substance that sort of allowed them to maintain balance on things. And now we know that it's not for that at all. It's used to drink. They drink kind of from their behinds in that sense, because it's not where their mouth is. Again, internalized mouth parts. They use it for excretion, and they use it to regulate the amount of water in their bodies. So, it doesn't have that purpose at all. They're also omnivores. They eat decaying matter. It doesn't matter whether it's animal or plant-based in origin, which is why they're used in biologically dynamic substrate. Anybody who's familiar with terrariums or even houseplants that require a lot of water, if you look really close at the soil, you'll notice these little white specks moving around. Chances are they're springtails. I mean, they could be a few other things. There are pseudoscorpions, and there are lice that small and things of that sort. But chances are, if you have dynamic substrate, you have springtails. That's kind of the whole point to actually having it. It's because they eat decaying organic matter, and they keep it clean, and they keep it sort of sterile. They prevent unwanted organisms from colonizing the terrarium. Nobody wants a box full of mold, unless they're trying to grow penicillin or something. But the most notable thing about springtails, hands down, in addition to the fact that they have 6 legs but aren't an insect, is what's called the furcula, the springtail. As I mentioned before, it's not cerci. And what's interesting about it is, one, they tend to be about the same length as their body, and that alone is it's notable. It's a very peculiar looking appendage. And what they do is they strike it against the ground and use it to spring upward away from predators. So it's kind of like, it carries out a similar function to the orthopteran's leg muscles. It springs them away from things. And you see this in other animals, like in Coleoptera and beetles. You see Elateridae, the click beetle, which, if you ever played with those as a kid, that might be one of the reasons why I'm interested in insects. Was when I was little, I remember finding click beetles, and it was so fun to flip them over on their back and watch them strike the ground with that really interesting trigger and just flip right up into the air, almost like a bullet. It was really cool. One of those things that I remember distinctly got me interested in insects. Springtails have something similar. That's what their furcula are used for. Other than that, there's not much else to discuss on springtails that I can think of, other than the fact that, yeah, they're very important for substrate. Let's move on to the next one, because there's three total that need to be discussed. There's Collembola, which we just covered, springtails. There's Diplura, and there's Protura. So Protura are sometimes called coneheads. They're also tiny. You might see them in addition to springtails and substrate. Probably should have mentioned that when I was talking about that. They are genetically distinct from insects as well. So sometimes they're actually even put in a different class than Hexapoda. Or subphylum rather. I'm a little skeptical of that. Just looking at their overall physiology, even in my opinion, because the importance of using taxonomy to understand the overall direction in which creatures evolved, just from a physiological standpoint, even if it's a case of what's that called? Not symmetrical evolution. Even if it's an instance where they simply evolved to be physiologically similar, the overlapping physical qualities that they have, I think they should still be considered hexapods. They have 6 legs. They're hexapods by all rights, in my opinion. They're as simple as you can get. Even with the name, you hear the name Protura. I mean, what does pro mean? Before. So there's something inherently primitive about them just from the name. They do not have antennae, unlike springtails. They don't have any kind of pigmentation. They don't have wings. They don't have eyes. They're almost like oversized water bears without the complex survival abilities. They look like little tubes with legs, and that's kind of what they are, really. They only walk with 4 of their legs, and they use the other 2 kind of sort of as substitute antennae. Yeah, weird creatures. Just these little fleshy cylinders with internal mouth parts, just like Collembola, just like springtails. They have intonathous mouth parts. They have a head capsule, which every animal we're covering has one of those. And here's one of my big arguments for why they should still be considered hexapods. They actually have this in common with insects more so than springtails. If you look at a springtail's mouth parts, they're almost like little gears. Protura, they actually have distinct maxillae and mandibles. Like if you recall the Orthoptera episode where I'm talking about insect anatomy and mouth parts, they look remarkably similar. They also don't have cerci, which also shouldn't be that much of a shock. And actually the name Ura. I was torn. I was like, is it Tura or Ura? It actually means tail. So even the name, before or primitive tail. In this case, it would mean before tail. It would mean that they came about before any kind of extension of the abdomen evolved. So kind of interesting. They, As for their growth cycle, just like springtails, actually just like every other primitive insect we're discussing, they're all hemimetabolists. They do not undergo these complicated metamorphoses that you'll see in many insects. Unlike springtails, this is actually more complicated because sometimes, we're going back into insect respiration. I know I did a whole video on that before, but sometimes things evolve and diverge in ways that are a little unexpected. So springtails generally breathe through spiracles, and so do proturans. But some families have evolved tracheal systems, and it's because they live in such low oxygen environments that it was necessary. So I was about to give kind of a sweeping generalization, and really it's probably not the best to do. They do not all breathe through spiracles the way we think. With most insects, for example, they breathe through spiracles. Well, there are a few non-insect hexapods who have evolved a tracheal breathing system similar to arachnids. So it's worth mentioning. That's I think all I'm going to cover for them. You can find them, same with springtails, in leaf litter in any kind of dynamic substrate. The only thing is they tend to not thrive in acidic soil, so that's something to bear in mind. Like if you are looking for dynamic substrate, you could get away with springtails with peat moss, but you probably have a lot of trouble with that with proturans because they don't like acidic environments. Let's see. Last one, Diplura. Now those you can't mistake them for anything else. As I mentioned, protoras don't have any kind of extension to their abdomen, and springtails have those little springs. Well, Diplora, they go even further with that. They're actually sometimes called bristletails for this reason. Their extended appendages are massive and they have hairs that extend on either side. So kind of unmistakable. Really, the reason I saved them for last is because I've physically already described the other two. They kind of actually look like if a springtail and a protoran had a kid. Their bodies are remarkably similar to protora, little segmented cylinder body, but they have antennae, like an insect, and then they have those massive extensions, just like a springtail, except instead of folding them under their body, they extend all the way out. It would be extremely easy if you saw that to mistake it for Circe, but they're not actually. In fact, they actually have a different name from what Columbella has. What were those things called? They may actually just be called antennae, but yeah, totally physiologically different. And you probably know where I'm going with this in terms of their environment. Where do they live? Moist soil, humus, leaf litter, the same kind of thing. By the way, humus means not in the soil context, so nobody freak out and think that they've got it in their dip. Their most interesting quality that they have that does distinguish them for the other two is they actually have chewing mouth parts. And unlike the other two who prefer just to eat detritus, every now and again they will actually be observed engaging in predatory behavior. So they will actually hunt down food. They do eat decomposing matter too, but they actually will engage in active predation. So absolutely worth covering. So yeah, the reason why I wanted to cover all those, oh man, I guess I should probably also cover myriapods, shouldn't I? Yeah. No, you know what? I'm going to hold off on that for like a much later episode. I'm already almost 13 minutes in, and that's like a 10-minute conversation. Same thing with isopods. So that's it for insects for a while, and other hexapods for a while. Like, share, subscribe, and keep asking questions. Bye.